Who might think silence is harmless, that by not saying anything, by stepping away quietly, you're causing no real damage. But that's a profound misunderstanding of how human beings operate. Silence, especially after intimacy, is not nothing. It's not neutral. In fact, silence in that context is a loaded weapon. It's the emotional equivalent of slamming a door you never opened again. When you stop talking to someone, especially someone who once had a place in your heart, you are not just opting out of a conversation. You are introducing ambiguity, and ambiguity is one of the most mentally destabilizing forces in human psychology. See, we're creatures of meaning. That's what sets us apart. We can't help but assign narratives to everything that happens around us. That's how we survive psychologically. It's how we structure our days, our relationships, and even our identities. And when something meaningful is abruptly withdrawn, when communication stops without warning or explanation, you leave the other person in a kind of psychic freefall. There's no closure. There's no closure. There's no conclusion. There's no conclusion. There's just a gaping hole where connection used to be, and that hole doesn't stay empty. It fills quickly with fear, with confusion, with shame. Because when people don't know what's true, they start imagining what's worst. And what you have to understand, especially if you've never been on the receiving end of this kind of vanishing act, is that this silence doesn't feel like indifference. It feels like punishment. It feels like abandonment dressed up in apathy. It says, without saying, you're not even worth the effort of explanation. And that is deeply wounding, especially to someone who opened themselves up to you. When you go silent, she doesn't just hear quiet. She hears rejection. She hears disrespect, and most destructively, she hears doubt. Doubt in her own value. Doubt in her intuition. Doubt in everything she thought was real between you. And the tragedy is, most people don't realize they're doing this kind of damage. They rationalize their silence. I just needed space. I didn't know what to say. It wasn't that serious. But those are post hoc justifications for emotional cowardice. Because in reality, it's much easier to disappear than it is to tell someone the truth, that you've lost interest, that your feelings changed, that you didn't have the maturity or courage to continue. But that truth, however painful, would at least allow the other person to recalibrate, to mourn, to heal. Silence, on the other hand, leaves them trapped in a narrative loop where every possible explanation makes them feel worse. I've seen this happen again and again in clinical settings. A patient will come in devastated not by a breakup, but by the way it happened. Not the loss of the relationship, but the absence of clarity. It derails their ability to trust not just others, but themselves. They say things like, I thought things were going well. I didn't see it coming. Was I just being naive? And suddenly it's not just that they've lost you. They've lost faith in their own reality. That's a massive psychological injury, one that takes months, sometimes years, to untangle. You might think this is overly dramatic, that surely someone can just move on. But what you don't understand is that silence doesn't just communicate withdrawal, it communicates contempt. It says, you're not even worth the decency of an ending. And that message, whether you intend it or not, is encoded in the silence. And once it lands, it festers. It creates a feedback loop of insecurity and overanalysis, where the person left behind starts obsessing over everything they said, every moment they shared, every word they could have misread. And this is where we see the real damage, not in the moment of silence itself, but in what it breeds: rumination, self-blame, the slow erosion of emotional stability. She'll replay your last conversation 1,000 times. She'll scroll through old messages trying to locate the exact moment you started pulling away. She'll question her judgment, her worth, her ability to be loved. All because you didn't have the courage to say, I'm leaving. And that's a terrible legacy to leave in someone's life. An unanswered question that haunts them every time they start to trust again. So no, silence is not a clean break. It's not graceful. It's not mature. It's the easy way out that leaves the most damage behind. Because when you stop talking to her, what you're really saying is, figure out what happened without me. And that for someone who once looked at you as a safe place is not just confusing. It's devastating. When you stop talking to her, the silence doesn't just sit there like a blank space. It grows, twists. It evolves into something far more powerful than the absence of words. And here's what you must understand. The human mind, particularly in times of uncertainty, is a relentless meaning-making machine. It cannot tolerate a vacuum, especially not in matters of the heart. So when you disappear, When your voice vanishes and no explanation follows, her brain doesn't go quiet. It goes into overdrive. She begins to write a story, a narrative, a hypothesis. And not because she wants to, but because she has to. The pain of not knowing becomes unbearable. So her psyche rushes in to fill that silence with something, anything, that can make sense of the emotional chaos now unfolding inside her. And tragically, those stories she tells herself are rarely kind. They're rarely generous. They're rarely true. Because when the only data she has is your absence, your withdrawal, your indifference, she starts to piece together a version of events that almost always places the blame on her own shoulders. This is the psychological trap you've constructed, whether you intended to or not. I'm not. She starts with, maybe he's busy. Then it becomes, maybe he's upset with me. And from there it spirals into, maybe I pushed him away. Or worse, maybe he never cared in the first place. These aren't just insecure thoughts. These are survival mechanisms. Her mind is trying to regain control over an uncontrollable situation. Because as much as we crave love and connection, what we crave even more is certainty. And when you walk away without a word, you replace what was once a shared narrative with an unsolvable riddle. And the human heart, particularly a woman's heart in this context, is deeply sensitive to the stories it tells. When she imagines that your silence means she wasn't enough, it doesn't just hurt. It alters the very architecture of her self-worth. She doesn't simply miss you. She doubts herself. She replays moments, fragments of conversations, jokes you shared, glances across a room, looking for some subtle sign that you were already pulling away. She becomes a detective in a crime she didn't know was committed, sifting through the ruins of something that once felt safe. It's no small thing, this narrative creation. In fact, it can become foundational to her worldview. And that's why ghosting or silent withdrawal is more than just a bad habit. It's a form of emotional vandalism. You enter someone's life, establish intimacy, invite trust, and then vanish, leaving behind a mess they have to clean up with no tools and no explanations. And as they clean up, as they try to organize the mess in their minds, they build beliefs about themselves, about love, and about what they're worth. Beliefs that don't always heal, beliefs that often harden. And we wonder why people become guarded. We wonder why women become skeptical, distrusting, cynical. But how could they not? When someone they let in suddenly drops out of their life, like they never mattered, they are forced to write the ending themselves. And let me tell you, those endings are rarely written in hope. They're written in heartbreak, in humiliation, in shame, because the logic goes like this. If he left without a word, maybe I wasn't worth one. And maybe the saddest part of all is that most of this torment could be avoided with a few honest sentences. A simple acknowledgement. A difficult but respectful conversation. But that's not what usually happens, is it? Instead, we hand people a puzzle with half the pieces missing and expect them to move on. But they don't move on. They don't move on. Not really. They move forward maybe, but with a limp, with a scar, with a version of themselves that's just a little less trusting, a little more afraid. The silence becomes a defining event, and the narrative she builds around that silence doesn't end when she stops thinking about you. No, it lingers. It shows up in the next relationship, and the next one, and the one after that. It becomes part of the filter through which she interprets future love. It tells her to brace for impact the moment things get too close. And not because she's dramatic, but because you taught her that closeness comes with sudden disappearance. So when you stop talking to her, understand what you're really doing. You're not just exiting a conversation. You're handing her a pen and forcing her to write a story that explains your vanishing act. And you may never read that story, but she will, over and over again, until it becomes part of who she is. And when someone you care about disappears from your life without a word, you're not just dealing with the absence of that person. You're confronted with the collapse of a story you believed you were a part of. And the mind doesn't take well to collapse stories. It's not designed to live in chaos. So she tells herself, maybe I was too much, or maybe I wasn't enough. She imagines that she misunderstood your connection, that perhaps she invented it in her head. And that's devastating. Wow. Because now she's not just questioning the relationship. She's questioning her capacity to perceive reality correctly. When someone makes you feel something deeply and then disappears without explanation, it creates a rift in your ability to trust your own instincts. And that loss of trust in yourself is far more destructive than the loss of the other person, because it's internal. It follows you. It shows up in every room you walk into afterward. This is how emotional chaos bleeds into future relationships. She becomes guarded, even when someone kind and attentive enters her life. She hesitates to believe in goodness because she's been taught that love can vanish without warning. That silence can replace intimacy in a heartbeat. So she braces for impact. She prepares for abandonment. And she stops letting herself get too close because she's still picking through the debris of the last emotional disaster. And all of this could have been prevented, or at least softened, with a few honest words. But instead, she was left to assemble the ruins on her own. And it's easy for the person who left to minimize all of this. She's just being dramatic, they might say. But it's not drama. It's the aftermath of psychological shock. You see, emotions aren't just feelings. They're data. They're biological signals crafted over millions of years, helping us navigate connection, safety, and danger. When someone is pulled close and then suddenly let go without reason, those emotional systems go haywire. Fight or flight doesn't know whether to activate. The mind doesn't know whether to grieve or hope, so it does both on loop. She grieves the loss and hopes for clarity, and when neither comes, she spirals deeper. So no, it's not just about a missed call or an unread message. It's about the psychological devastation that occurs when human connection, one of the most vital structures we depend on, is yanked away without logic or explanation. The mind scrambles to rewrite a story it never got to finish, and the heart bleeds in the spaces where meaning should have lived. That is the true cost of silence. And she bears it alone, not because she wants to, but because she was given no choice. There's this dangerous idea that floats around modern culture, particularly among those trying to dodge accountability, that communication is optional, that you don't owe anyone anything, that walking away in silence is just a part of life, or worse, a form of self-care. But that kind of thinking, while convenient, is morally bankrupt. It ignores the fundamental truth that the words we speak or choose not to speak carry enormous psychological weight. Communication isn't just a courtesy, it's a responsibility, especially when you've invited someone into the emotional architecture of your life. When you've opened a door to intimacy, to trust, to shared vulnerability, that act binds you. Maybe not legally, but certainly ethically. And when you choose to leave that connection without a word, without even the bare decency of an explanation, what you're doing is more than avoidance. You're abandoning the emotional contract that exists between two people who have dared to care about each other. You're walking away from a structure you helped build, and you're leaving the other person to shoulder the collapse alone. What kind of person believes they can retreat from connection without any explanation and expect the other to simply accept it? That's not strength. That's not setting boundaries. That's evasion, pure and simple. It's weakness dressed up in stoicism. It's fear cloaked in false empowerment. It's a refusal to deal with the discomfort of being honest, even when the truth might hurt. But the truth, spoken respectfully, even clumsily, is still better than silence, yet. Because truth, even when painful, brings with it the possibility of closure. Silence brings only confusion and self-doubt. And the deeper question here is one of character. What kind of person do you want to be in the world? Do you want to be the sort of individual who builds relationships and then burns the bridge without warning? Do you want to go through life leaving behind a trail of people who were forced to piece together their worth from the shards of your silence? That's not maturity. That's moral negligence. Moral negligence. Because when you refuse to communicate, what you're really saying is, your feelings are not my problem, and that is a devastating message delivered to someone who once let you into their inner world. We talk a lot in psychological literature about the importance of emotional intelligence, of empathy, of relational integrity. And yet in practice, many people abandon these ideals the moment things get uncomfortable. But here's the truth. Discomfort is not a justification for disrespect. It's an invitation to rise, to act in accordance with something higher than impulse, to be the kind of person who confronts reality instead of running from it. Because running, especially when it involves other people's hearts, is not just an escape. It's a form of harm. People have a right to know where they stand. When you go silent, when you vanish without a word, you strip them of that right. You leave them stranded in a state of emotional limbo. And that limbo, as we've discussed, becomes fertile ground for all kinds of psychological torment. But it doesn't have to be that way. It's possible to leave people with dignity, to say, I care about you, but this isn't right for me, or I'm not in a place to continue, and I want to be honest about that. These aren't grand gestures. These are basic acts of decency. And they can make all the difference. It's easy to think that walking away quietly is harmless, that by not saying anything, you're avoiding drama. But that silence often creates more drama than any honest conversation ever would. Because when people don't get answers, they search for them. They invent them. They wrestle with them in the middle of the night. And in the absence of your voice, their inner critic becomes deafening. Your silence becomes their shame. That is not something to take lightly. This isn't about staying in relationships that no longer serve you. This isn't about obligating anyone to suffer through conversations that have run their course. This is about exiting with honor, about treating others as fellow travelers on the difficult path of life, deserving of clarity and respect. Because that's what they are. They're not disposable. They're not placeholders. They're people, flawed, beautiful, vulnerable people, trying to find their way just like you. So when you stop talking, when you choose silence over truth, know that you are making a statement. You are revealing something, not just about how you feel, but about who you are. And who you choose to be in those moments matters more than you think. At the heart of every meaningful relationship lies a delicate contract, unwritten, often unspoken, but deeply understood. It's a commitment to show up. You speak truth even when it's uncomfortable, to hold space for another human being, especially when emotions run high or uncertain. And when that contract is broken, not through loud arguments or betrayal, but through quiet retreat, it leaves behind a kind of wound that's hard to articulate. One that festers not because of what was said, but because of what was never said. What does it take then to honor that contract? What does it require to be the kind of person who doesn't vanish when things get difficult? The answer at its core is courage, real courage, real courage. The kind that's not glamorous, the kind that doesn't parade itself online or wrap itself in motivational quotes, the kind that's sweaty, shaky, and full of uncertainty. The courage to look someone in the eyes and tell them something they don't want to hear. The courage to risk being misunderstood. The courage to walk through discomfort instead of away from it. Because avoiding that discomfort, retreating into silence, is easy. It takes nothing. No explanation, no effort, no presence of mind. But doing the hard thing, the noble thing, the right thing, that requires the cultivation of something sorely lacking in so many modern relationships. Compassion fused with responsibility. She doesn't just feel the pain of your absence. She has to live with the story your silence forces her to write. And while you may walk away thinking you've avoided conflict, what you've really done is planted seeds of doubt, insecurity, and confusion in someone else's mind. That's not escape. That's abdication. And it has consequences, deep, invisible, enduring ones. So the call here is not for perfection. It's not for emotional heroism. It's for honesty, for responsibility, for a kind of grounded, courageous compassion that sees another human being not as a disposable chapter, but as a soul worthy of closure, of clarity, of dignity. You don't have to have all the right words. You just have to try. You have to speak. You have to show up, even at the end. Because silence may feel like the easy way out. But integrity, real integrity, never takes the easy way. It chooses the right way. And that, more than anything, is what the world needs now. Not more silence, but more people willing to speak truth, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts. Because that is where healing begins.